Welcome back to tOdi Secrets, the series in which we will be diving deep, peeling back the curtain, and revealing the behind-the-scenes secrets of my series, tOdi. In this episode, we're gonna be talking about a lot of grass. Y'all like grass? Episode 7. Silas. This episode is actually really meaningful to me. For one, this is the proper beginning of the grass field era, as it were, but this video also marked my return to YouTube. I won't get into it too much, but for those who don't remember or weren't there, towards the end of 2019, YouTube announced that it would be implementing some new regulations that if you were a YouTuber making videos about figures or toys, seemed kind of mildly apocalyptic, at least at the time. Now we can look back with clarity and say, well, the platform didn't actually end up changing meaningfully, barely at all, but it was scary. People were freaking out, I was freaking out, and I ended up taking some pretty drastic precautions by actually privating all of my content. I don't know how many people remember this, but there were about 6 months at the beginning of 2020 where BionicleSaurus was empty and I was gone. And that first half or so of 2020 was a strangely thoughtful and reflective, strangely positive period of time. Once I actually decided to return, I was able to do so with an improved mindset. And one of my changes in mindset had to do with tOdi. The show felt way more important to me now than it ever had before, and I think I was really starting to see its potential. And so, the first video I released upon my return was episode 7. Hey, this is the first episode with a last time on tOdi segment. Then we get some dialogue trying to connect this episode with episode 6. Episode 6, snow canonically takes place as a hallucination in Blizzard's head, which is a really weird way to incorporate it into the canon, but okay. And just like in episode 6, Grant's voice is still pitched way too low. I was lowering it way too much in post. He doesn't sound right.
Blizzard, you've been zoned out for 30 seconds. What did you think had happened in that span of time?
There's also this one specific line of dialogue from Grant, that is abnormal, I would say, that I can tell I re-recorded for some reason. I don't know if I forgot to record it or if I just had to redo it. I really don't remember, but you can tell it doesn't sound like it was recorded with the rest of his dialogue. I would say this episode marks the beginning of the show being more consistently plot-driven. There's really not any more episodes like Snow or 4th of July or Heatwave, no more true one-offs. From here on out, every episode, at least in some way, pushes the plot forward. And so this is probably a good time to ask, how much did I know by this point? And I think the answer is not much more than I knew when I made Hopped. I don't think I had too many specific ideas. I think maybe I had planned as far out as episode 9, perhaps. But even if I didn't know exactly where I was going, I think by this point, I was starting to just, get excited about the prospect of all the things I could do with this series. This episode also features another example, like several we discussed in part 1, of me kind of struggling to pick a specific humor style for the show, because this episode relies heavily on some kind of Curb Your Enthusiasm-esque awkward humor, except the inspiration was not actually Larry David, it was the 2007 film Death at a Funeral. And I specify 2007 because apparently there's another one and I haven't seen that one. And yeah, I think it works pretty well. I mean, a funeral is a good setting for some uncomfortable comedy. It just doesn't quite feel tOdi yet. There's some kind of fun details in this episode, like the spoon as a shovel by the little pile of dirt, implying that they did in fact dig Silas a grave. And of course all the dinosaurs are holding tissues like they've been crying. A little bit of Jane foreshadowing. Jane is actually pointedly the only character in the crowd not holding a tissue. Yeah, I've been hinting at Jane's villainy for a long time, just in ways so subtle I don't think anyone had hope of actually noticing them. I also like like how this box is obviously hiding the fact that, you know, I didn't actually dig a grave in my lawn. Oh yeah, and you can also totally tell that Grant is leaning on Anubis. You'll see Grant leaning on other figures, usually Nigel or Anubis, a lot during these grass field episodes, because that running Rex stands up for shit, and it was kind of hell to film with sometimes, so this was the only way I could get it to work consistently. Blizzard and Grant's relationship is developing nicely in this episode, and by nicely, I mean horribly. We should probably also ask, did I know where these characters were going yet? I don't think I had planned their arcs by this point, but I think I did have a better idea of what I wanted their general characterization to be. So I didn't have a plan yet, but I think things were starting to get more intentional. There's also this insane Blizzard line in this scene where he says this math equation super fast. It's a dirt simple math equation, but I do remember voice acting this line was legitimately very difficult. It was quite the tongue twister. And I think this was an early moment where it really hit me, you know, wow, this character is going to be a challenge if I keep writing him like this. Very notably, this scene also contains some of the only proper gore in the entire series, and it is weird. There's actual fake blood, and, you know, it's one main character accidentally maiming another main character. It's kind of genuinely uncomfortable, I think. The blood was jam, I don't remember what flavor. We also get this stock gasp sound effect. I really like occasionally just sort of tactically throwing in really overused generic stock sounds in this show. And this is actually one of 2 appearances by this classic gasp in tOdi. I'm curious if anyone else remembers where the other one is.
Grant, T-Rexes using their teeny tiny arms to actually do things isn't something that happens, it's something you put on an ironic t-shirt.
Fun fact, I actually do own an ironic t-shirt featuring a T-Rex trying and failing to do something with its teeny tiny arms. Technically, this episode is also the first time we ever hear Katie speak, although she's not actually speaking words, she's just kind of awkwardly mumbling under her breath. And this leads into something I want to unpack, which is the lack of speaking roles among really most of the characters. It's so weird. It's like I finally got together the main 9 characters, and most of them don't even have voices yet. I wonder if I was originally intending for only the main, 3 or 4 characters to actually speak, and for the other characters to just kind of be like, I guess silent extras, and then just sort of organically, one at a time, they all get their voices. It really is very strange. It's, another interesting artifact of just how improvisational and kind of organic the development of tOdi has been. And then it's revealed that Silas was actually buried alive, and I think I just covered my mouth with my hand to get these muffled screams, and it genuinely sounds kind of horrific. I was really going for it. I think I always knew that Silas was going to live. I think I may have very briefly kind of played around with the idea of actually killing him off, but pretty quickly I think I realized that, the show just wouldn't be very interesting if he just died so early. So yeah, I think I generally always planned for him to actually live through getting shot. And this episode ends with the first ever proper tOdi title card.
Yo, I'm editing and it's super late and I have to whisper, but somehow I forgot to mention Silas S. Muldoon. This episode is the first time we ever get to hear Silas's full canon name, and I should probably explain the origin of his name. Depressingly, there's not much of an origin story. Muldoon is, of course, a reference to a Jurassic Park character, and the S is, just alliteration with the name Silas, and that's it. But more interestingly, is what Blizzard's canonical name almost was, because I actually, in keeping with Silas S. Muldoon as like a format, I almost named Blizzard B. Spielberg, which would have been pretty funny, but years later my friend Eric came up with Blizzard H', which I do think is much better.
Episode 8. bored. This episode is just kind of authentically random. I really don't remember what my inspiration behind this episode was, besides just a few individual jokes I liked, I guess. The episode opens with just Silas and Blizzard kind of just standing together in the grass. There's no other characters around. I don't know where the other characters are, and we don't even get to see Silas get dug out of his grave. It's genuinely kind of an awkward place to begin, given where episode 7 concluded. I'm assuming I just couldn't find a good way to actually show Silas being freed from his grave, so I just didn't try. We get some glorious explosion effects, just me shaking my tripod and throwing cardboard. This episode also introduces us to Silas's band-aids, which I think are absolutely legendary. For one, he keeps his band-aids from here all the way until Entropy. They don't actually get removed until the Christmas special. And more remarkably, I never replaced his band-aids even once. He had the exact same band-aids on his legs through the entire show. I don't know why I did it. I was just really committed to it. And yes, once I finally removed them, his legs were disgustingly sticky. This is probably a good time to talk about the grass field as a filming location. Obviously, it's my front lawn, but what you should know about my front lawn is just how small it actually is. This was not an easy place to film in, especially when I was trying to make it look infinite. There are a lot of shots where my house or other parts of my yard are surely just barely out of frame. Not to mention, you know, it's outdoors, seasons change, weather changes. It really was not always convenient to film. There were points where I ended up having to wait basically an entire year to film an episode because I waited too long and it was past, summer and there were dead fall leaves all over the grass and I just couldn't film. I think that actually happened once or twice. We also get this glorious scene of Blizzard and Silas just animalistically devouring. Fuck! I literally can't say the word! We also get this glorious scene of Silas and Blizzard just mercilessly, animalistically devouring this Chinasaur. And this doesn't actually get explained or paid off until much later in episode 15. We'll talk about it more in part 3, but I really enjoy this sort of thing. I really like paying off seemingly random minor events way later in the show. We also get this SpongeBob-esque, a certain amount of time later text card, and I think this is the only time in the entire show we see really anything like that. There's this line where Blizzard says, "Do you feel weird?" I think there was something in that Chinasaur, and it's hard to remember, but I think I was actually once upon a time planning for there to actually be something in that Chinasaur, specifically a tracking device. Yeah, I don't really know what I was thinking. Obviously, the organization is supposed to be in complete control of this situation. I don't know why they just need to put a tracking device in Blizzard's ass, but okay. And the episode ends with Silas revealing that he did not, in fact, committeth the suicide after all. Episode 9. Suspects. I think this is really when the show kind of found itself. As far in as episode 7, I was still experimenting, trying to figure out the show's actual comedy style, and I think from episode 9 onwards, it's tOdi. This is actually the first episode with a proper microphone. Of course, I was still recording through Audacity and had no idea how to actually mix voiceover yet, but you know, upgrades, people, upgrades. And this episode, of course, features the famous tOdi board, a prop I still have, and in fact, I still have it mounted on my wall. I'm literally looking straight at it right now. You know, there's not much to it on a technical level. It's just a piece of cardboard with some paper and some Sharpie. But I do have one fun fact about it, which is that none of the images of the characters on the tOdi board are actually images of the characters. Most of them are just stock images of the figures, and Nigel and Hammer specifically are just random in-hand images of some other people's Carnegie T-Rex and Imaginext Pachycephalosaurus that I found on Google. Kind of a big deal, but this episode is when Katie, Anubis, and Hammer officially get their voices. Katie actually says words. We get to hear Anubis's voice now that he is, like a teenager as opposed to a tiny little baby child. And Hammer makes her first official vocalizations of the series. One of the most long-standing running gags throughout tOdi is Blizzard being aware that he is a fictional character in a show and being frustrated that he cannot convince any of the other characters of this truth. And I think this episode actually features the origin of that.
Blizzard, this is real life, not a frickin' TV show. Wait, it is?
We also learn that Blizzard is canonically 30 years old. I don't really think there's a reason for it. I think 30 just kind of sounded right for some reason. This episode also sees the origin of the Nigel Scalpels running joke. Which in this episode is just in the form of Blizzard struggling to scrape together evidence for why Nigel could be the murderer. But later on, we learn that Nigel does actually apparently have like a thing for scalpels, and scalpels is also literally his last word.
I would like to get back to my 6-figure salary and my extensive collection of sterile metal blades. Scalpels! Nigel, no!
This is the first episode where I had to at least be thinking about what I wanted to do with Hammer. I don't know if I knew about Berserker Hammer yet, but I think I was already starting to conceptualize the concept. Jesus Christ. I think I was already starting to conceptualize the idea of this, Monster Island Buddies Titanosaurus-esque split personality. I don't know how much else I knew at this point. I know that by episodes 10 or 11, I knew where I was going. I know by then I knew about Berserker Hammer and Dartclaw. Well, Dartclaw even appears in episode 11. By that point, I had a solid outline of the entire story. We also get this quote from Razor about the great juju at the bottom of the sea, which I think is actually a Richard Dawkins reference, which, that's a shame. There's also some nice Silas character work in this episode, specifically where he almost gives up and turns away from his friends, but ends up helping them anyway. Kind of an early sign that, the defining aspect of his character is going to end up being his love for his friends.
Did you seriously think the murderer was one of us? I literally never thought otherwise, no.
Fun fact, but my friend Eric apparently literally did never think otherwise. And it kind of made me realize that this was a little bit more of a plot twist than I actually intended it to be. Lastly, this episode actually contains some of my favorite Jane foreshadowing. Specifically the fact that she is the only character Blizzard is not suspicious of. She's the only character who doesn't speak in the episode, the only character who they don't talk about in the episode, and the only thing written down about her on the board is she's probably fine, TBH. I'm surprised no one actually picked up on this one. It feels so pointed and obvious to me. Episode 10. Hike. This episode starts with a little bit of a heat wave reference. We once again have a character's narration as the primary framing device of the episode. And we even get a more explicit reference to heat wave with Blizzard complaining about Grant's, quote, horrifically odoriferous excretions. Blizzard and Razor seem to be getting along.
And Razor is being evil because he's not a real person and doesn't deserve rights.
I should probably talk a little bit about my overall thematic concept for Blizzard and Razor. It's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously Blizzard is like a racist, and Razor is kind of symbolic of, a member of an unfamiliar culture. And I wanted to make sure I added a little bit of humanizing nuance to Razor. Like, he is genuinely creepy and weird, and some of his cultural traditions and normalities seem kind of problematic. But obviously, the point is that, that's not an excuse for Blizzard to be a weird bigot.
Damn, that is some pixelated stock footage!
I got this campfire effect by using a fire and ice light, which is a fairly common item for Halloween decor and such. Hey, Jane finally has a voice. And listen to the first line she ever says.
Maybe we'll find the ghost of my dead mother.
Way to kill the mood, you friggin' sourpuss.
Yeah, it's safe to say I was trying to be very consistent in my characterization of this character. This episode also features the first proper Argleblarg. In episode 9, Hammer did make some noises, but it's not until this episode we get to hear the first of her many phrases. Her others, of course, being Gerbil, Gerblark, and when she's really excited, Blalarg. Then we get this remarkably shitty green screen explosion. I don't even know if it is green screen because it's just on a black background. Like, I didn't even try to get the characters in the same shot. It's this completely disconnected looking footage. I made this tent out of a cloth napkin and some random sticks. Amazing. You can tell I also shot this final scene on a cloudy day so that it would look more like it actually was the next morning and it was still kind of overcast and foggy. And this episode concludes with our first kind of appearance of Cryo, that we actually only hear his voice and get a POV view through his binoculars. Episode 11. Pain! Well, if we thought last episode opened with a reference to Heatwave, this episode is even more direct about it, giving the narrator role to Silas and opening with the exact same wording as episode 4. I also think it's a fun detail that in the last episode, Grant was trying to start a fire, and in this one he's trying to build a shelter. I think it actually makes sense, given that Grant is trying so hard to kind of prove himself and get the other characters to stop hating him. It makes sense that he would kind of be the proactive one trying to help. There's a line where Silas says Blizzard is, quote, sweating profusely, and I'm really surprised that I didn't take better advantage of it and pour water on Blizzard and then just cut to him inexplicably drenched in sweat. That would have been so good. I'm really surprised I didn't think of it. We also get some rather serious and dramatic dialogue between Blizzard and Silas in this episode. We'll talk about it more in part 3, but blending those serious moments in with the comedy is always a challenge. I think Hopped is a good example of me not really doing it very well. And I think this episode actually has one of the earlier, more positive examples. I don't know if I knew about Silas and Blizzard's character arcs by this point, but I probably did, and at the very least, I knew generally where they were going, and I had a better idea of what their actual internal flaws and motivations actually were. This is also the episode where Razor becomes a mute, and I should probably explain why that is. Long story short, I hate voice acting Razor. His voice is super breathy, but also has a slight bit of distortion. It's really just a horrible combination of factors, and it's genuinely difficult for me to do more than 1 or 2 lines in his voice without coughing and being in, genuine pain. So I basically invented an entire plot point of Blizzard bullying Razor into silence, just so I wouldn't have to do Razor's voice anymore. Then a straight-up nether portal appears. I did try to come up with some way to build an interdimensional portal prop out of, practical materials, but I just never really came up with anything. So I caved and did something really dumb, but pretty fun, in my opinion, and just used a straight-up Minecraft nether portal. And fun fact, this portal actually still exists. It was built in one of my Minecraft test worlds, and I even put a commemorative sign on it. Also, Blizzard uses the phrase budgetary constraints, which would come back as a running joke in episode 13. Then we get our first appearance of Dartclaw and Fetish, and I want to talk a little bit about how both of those characters were named. So why is it Dartclaw and not Darkclaw, like the Dinosaur Island character? Well, Spino Dude, a person you are probably aware of, genuinely misheard Darkclaw's name for years and legitimately thought the character's name was Dartclaw. So when it came time to bring back this character in tOdi, I was just like, fuck it. I'm naming it the incorrect David version. And Fetish was named by my friend Aiden, or Kikizilla101. He actually not only came up with the name, but also the entire bit from Entropy about like, oh, he has a fetish and we don't know what it is, but it's really bad. This final scene in episode 11 also features our first proper hint regarding Hammer's secret identity, and also the first mention of the coordinate. So yeah, it's safe to say that by this point, in terms of planning, I'm pretty sure I knew basically everything. And the final thing regarding Pain is actually its original thumbnail. When this video was first uploaded, it had a slightly different thumbnail image. It was actually the same image of Blizzard, but with the sweat emoji plastered to his forehead and an MS Paint, I know it was MS Paint, an MS Paint cartoon eyeball drawn over his actual eye. I don't know why I did this, and it took me way too many years to finally change it, but yeah, it didn't look good, and obviously it just doesn't fit with tOdi. Episode 12. Portal. Earlier, I mentioned that sometimes I wasn't able to film episodes when I wanted to, specifically during the grass field era, because of changing seasons and inconsistent weather, and this episode is the one example of me going, fuck it, it's the fall, there's dead leaves all over the grass, and I'm gonna film a tOdi episode anyway. And of course, I made a joke out of it. The episode opens with Blizzard literally saying that the group has been standing here for so long that the seasons have changed. I think this is honestly one of my personal favorite jokes in the entire series. This was, I'm pretty sure, the first episode of tOdi I edited in Sony Vegas. Before Sony Vegas, I was using a cheap editing program called VideoPad, which you should only ever buy if you hate yourself. And I can tell in this episode I hadn't quite yet gotten the hang of working with exposure and color correction. The footage just looks a little extra contrasty for some reason. This episode features, I think, Blizzard's first acknowledgement that tOdi is specifically a YouTube series and not a TV show. We also have a Minecraft reference in this episode. Blizzard acknowledges that he should probably bring a flint and steel and a fire resistance potion with him before entering the portal, so that's kind of fun. This episode also notably features, I think, the first ever utterance of the word shit in tOdi. We'll talk about it more in part 3, but swearing in tOdi is kind of an interesting topic. Suffice to say, I tried to bring it in as gradually and gently as possible, because I didn't want, anyone to find it jarring. You can tell I was still writing Jane as this character who was trying really hard to overcompensate, so no one would suspect her. She's clearly trying to play the role of the cautionary character, trying to convince the others not to enter the portal, even though surely she knows this is a part of Dartclaw's plans. And after entering the portal, she looks genuinely kind of freaked out and nervous. I think when I made this episode, I actually intended for her not to know what was on the other side of the portal. Ergo, she's actually surprised to see her own home base of operations. In retrospect, with everything we now know about the canon, that doesn't entirely make sense, so I guess we can just say she's faking it. And then the episode ends with a cliffhanger that I had been anticipating for a really long time. By this point, I had known about Berserker Hammer, Dartclaw, the evil organization, Pillywig, all the other dimensions, the final battle we were building to, the gods, for quite a while. And so, as much as I enjoyed the grass field era, and I definitely did, it's an era I, if nothing else, look back on very fondly and nostalgically, by the time I reached episode 12, I was more than ready to move on to bigger and better things for tOdi. But those bigger and better things are for part 3. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed, and make sure to tune in next time. We're gonna be discussing 4 of the longest, most unhinged episodes of tOdi: Calamity, Hammer, Exposition, and Blizzard. Hey, that's the name of the main character.